Good evening. You're watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Dave Frank, and we are talking national news, political news of the day. We are going to start with a federal court judge decision in Northern California. The case is East Bay Sanctuary Covenant with a bunch of other plaintiffs suing the Biden administration to stop the asylum system that he has implemented, which arguably has kept the border situation way down in terms of numbers crossing. I believe they were at over 1 million before this policy was implemented, and before the former Title 40, I'm forgetting what it is, 42. 42, thank you, was ended, and Biden's replacement came into effect a couple months ago. The crossings have gone from over 1 million contacts made in a week to under 100,000. But the same judge that basically blocked Trump's policy, his name is I'll have to find Judge John Tigar, I'm not sure, Tagar, has basically, in a preliminary injunction, blocked the asylum policy, specifically the policy that requires that any asylum applicants who are traveling through another country, of course we all know they're talking about Mexico, has to apply for asylum there first, be denied before they can apply here. The ACLU has argued that violates international law and, of course, other law. And the border's in the news a lot lately, of course, because of the razor wire issue that we saw last week and a number of other things. But this is threatening the Biden administration's, at least ostensibly on the face of things, success at reducing the crossings of people across the border. But civil rights and human rights groups have said that this is an unfair and illegal application of asylum. And so far, this judge agrees with them. Dave?
So I found this pretty interesting because you and I have talked about this before, where we, at least myself, I had considered these policies to be in violation of U.S. law and also international law around the principles of asylum, which basically say that if people are facing physical threats of physical harm and et cetera, that they do in fact have the right, the international right, the American granted right to petition to get relief through asylum process. And that when you tell people that they can only go through the border points, the open gates, et cetera, then that you're disqualifying an internationally and nationally recognized right just because somebody came through the inappropriate mechanism. But the Justice Department is considering I think they called this rule the circumvention of lawful pathways rule. So they're saying, hey, look, we have lawful pathways, and if you don't use them, then we're going to be prohibited for 5 years from asking again. And the judge, I think you said this already, but the judge struck this down, basically saying it's both substantively and procedurally invalid.
Yes.
So that's the big takeaway. I think there's a little bit of a joke in here too, and not that it's that funny to some people, but when the hearings first started for this complaint, the judge said, and this is a quote, "I read somewhere 2023 was going to be a big year for sequels." And then the Justice Department lawyer said, "I would call this more of a remake." And basically the Justice Department is acknowledging that they were looking for the same outcome that the Trump administration was looking for with their immigration policy, basically that there's just a lot of political pressure to do something, and that this administration didn't want to follow in the exact same footsteps as Trump for obvious reasons. And so the last thing I'll say in this preliminary part of our conversation here is that when the White House was asked for comment on the judge's decision, Karine Jean-Pierre, what she said was, "We see this as nothing has changed. We're moving forward with our plan. The Justice Department is going to appeal because the judge gave 14-day stay of his ruling to continue to do status quo. And basically, they're going to petition for the privilege of continuing this policy through the appeals process. And so, all things being equal, if status quo is maintained, then it could be a prolonged delay until this is implemented.
Meaning probably until after the election next year. I mean, I hate to be cynical about that, and I think the Biden administration is playing a little bit of cynical politics here, in that even if they're overturned, he can actually go and make the case and say, hey, I implemented a policy. It worked better than my predecessors, dramatically better. But the court overturned me. What can I do? I got to, respect what the courts say. I mean, it's so even if it fails, even if he loses the appeal and it comes back to it, he's kind of provided cover for himself in a way. It worked, quote unquote, until then. But this is a I mean, I personally agree with this ruling. This was a bad policy to implement. It's not that different from Trump's policy. Okay, we don't have the zero tolerance anymore. We've got some other things that are different about it, but it's the same idea. And obviously, people have to go through Mexico to get here. Mexico's asylum, it's complicated. I mean, people do apply there, but it is not an answer for a lot of people for a number of reasons. And we don't even have time to go into it here, but for one thing, sometimes they're not even safe there because, particularly from Central America, the gangs have followed them up in there, have a harder time to get into the United States, and they're on the border in Tijuana terrorizing people. I mean, it's just, but even more than that, it just slows down their progress. They can't get to where they're eventually going to be because Mexico will not grant them asylum. And the laws are, ironically, not the same. And there's a lot of disadvantages, and immigration lawyers will go into it as to why it just doesn't provide the same opportunities. And of course, it also doesn't provide the economic opportunities of people who come here who have a better chance of making it. And that should be considered part of the policy. If you're starving in Mexico because you're having a hard time getting a job, and it's just or finding work, there's just a whole lot to do. But this policy not allowing somebody to apply for asylum who came over a non-legal checkpoint, it actually predates this. This goes back some years, and in fact, so what a lot of people do, how they get into the country, they don't cross the Rio Grande. They try to drive through, get rides driving through, and the first time they don't make it, the second time they don't make it, but eventually, if they keep trying, there's a possibility that they'll just get waved through because people get tired. They can't check every car. They can't check everybody's ID for every car. There just isn't time to do that, and also allow commerce to get back and forth across. So that once they get across the checkpoint, there's actually a McDonald's that's famous that's at the California border where they'll stop and they'll buy a sandwich and have the receipt to prove that they crossed at that checkpoint. My understanding too is those receipts can be sold for money. I mean, it's just this is yeah, I mean, we really need to look at it. And of course, the Biden, the crisis is at the border. That's what everybody's looking at, is reducing the number of people coming across the border. We're about to have this big legal fight over the razor wire, and he would like to be able to have the upper hand in that discussion, saying we've already reduced the numbers. You don't have to slice up immigrants and to the point where they need to have staples or even die to do this, So yeah, this is a big deal, and the judge did allow for the stay. We'll see what the circuit court does, but the circuit court did uphold this judge's decision last time around.
So one of the things that I thought was interesting that you mentioned, which I'd like to elaborate on, is you said, let's not forget here, I'm paraphrasing, that the crisis is all the people coming across, and that there's a call out, there's an antagonism from, say, the right, but also a empathetic aspiration to do something better and different from the left. And then the reasonable people are like, let's just do something, not to say that the right and the left aren't reasonable. Centrist people are saying, let's do something reasonable here. So one thing I want to point out is that there was a former immigration official from the Biden administration, no longer working, who said, hey, this is the right decision, but one that Democrats would have celebrated if this was the Trump administration. Her name is Andrea Flores. And what she said was, the asylum ban is not the answer to managing migration, but legal pathways, more in-region processing options, the CBP One app, and devoting resources to expedite the asylum process just might be the best way forward. So I kind of was looking into that and saying, like, well, what actually is happening here? So from 30,000 foot view, there's about 2 million cases backlogged in the immigration court in the U.S. 40% of these are estimated to be asylum cases where we don't know the outcomes yet, but these are folks that they're eligible for their day in court. And we add about 1 million new cases a year. So we're going in the wrong direction. But what we were until recently, but it turns out they've put more new judges in place. They've streamlined the process, and they anticipate that by the end of the fiscal year, which is relatively soon, end of September, we will have gotten through about 500,000 cases in the last year, which is great progress. But not good enough, because if we're adding 1 million this year, that means the backlog is going to continue to increase. So like threading the needle here based on what that recommendation was from the former Biden administration official, and then just the raw numbers. One of the things that was said is that, hey, by the way, this new asylum policy that the Biden administration put in place is not the only reason that we're seeing relief. I was looking at the data from the Customs Border Patrol, and it's complicated, but a couple bullet points here, which I think are really important to visualize to get a sense of why the reduction in flow is actually happening. It's not just this Biden plan. Mexico has stepped up its interdiction at the southern border and began increased deportation of folks down back to Guatemala. This GBP One app is actually helping with orderly processing by scheduling hundreds of thousands of people for appointments. They're currently scheduling 40,000 people per month. So those are people that are not flooding the border in a chaotic way, because they're like, oh, I have an appointment. So they're doing their chill out in wherever they are, and it's making the situation look better. Also, there's new U.S. programs in place that have allowed several 100,000 people to enter legally for at least 2 years if they prove they have financial sponsors or an active visa application to reunite with family members or relatives. And so like these programs, we're not talking super vague here. They help people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Ukraine. So the judge actually did say, and one last thing on that, combine these efforts, put downward pressure from the prior rate of about 200,000 a month down to, maybe about 150,000 a month or so. So that's a quarter. That's nearly a quarter, or 20%. It's 20% of the amount of folks that are finding other ways to manage and navigate the process. So last thing I want to say here is that the judge actually said, hey, it's great that you guys have these plans in place, but those plans discriminate. You're discriminating against certain countries.
Right. It favors Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Ukraine, which I didn't learn until several months ago, that Ukrainians are actually going to Mexico to come up into the United States. I don't quite understand why that's happening, but it is happening. But yes, the judge called it arbitrary and capricious.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. No, that was it. I was hoping you would say those exact words. The judge basically is saying, like, you're American asylum law via Congress wrote it, and that's the law of the land. It doesn't say that you could be from one country or another country. It doesn't say that you could go to one avenue or another avenue. Even when you expand the avenues for people to get into the country, for example, this GBP One app, that doesn't improve that Congress didn't approve that like say that these increased methods of expediting things are beneficial or even part of the law. They're they're extra
Right.
legal. They're extra
But
legal.
do you think that there's also maybe some objection, even if the ACLU can't raise this because they don't have evidence? But look at the countries they've chosen. I mean, okay, Ukraine and Haiti are one thing, but Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela are left wing or kind of left wing. Nicaragua's debatable as to whether Ortega is left wing or anything anymore. But Cuba and Venezuela are countries we like to rail against, so we prioritize them over Guatemala or El Salvador, which are your possibility of surviving is actually possibly worse than those countries, but because they're not on seen as communists or evil in our political framework, they're not on the list. And I wonder if that's where the arbitrary and capricious comes from.
It's certainly arbitrary, but I think, subjectively speaking, I think like if you look at a Guatemala or a Honduras, there's no real reason to keep them off that list, or for that matter, El Salvador, because the same conditions apply. Any sort of category that I would have proposed for Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela for why they might deserve special treatment, deserve in air quotes, why leave Honduras and Guatemala off that list?
No, it doesn't make any sense, except that the three of those countries are at least seen as left wing, and I just have to bring up that part of the politics.
Yeah, to be continued. I know we don't have a whole lot of time here, but the idea is that in theory we should focus on putting resources towards expediting the asylum process for these backlogged folks.
In an email sent by a Texas DPS trooper to a superior obtained by ABC News, one trooper writing, quote, "I believe we have stepped over a line into the inhumane." The trooper recounting a patrol where they came across a large group of migrants, including small children and babies, writing, quote, "We were given orders to push the people back into the water to go to Mexico." Adding, when they expressed concerns of exhaustion and drowning and contacted command, they were again, quote, "given the order to tell them to go to Mexico."
When you're looking at the wire, when you're looking at these floating devices, to be frank with you, that is a death trap. There is absolutely no consequence that would ever discourage desperate human souls who are willing to sacrifice their lives for the hope of the American dream.
All right, we have Florida's education program is kind of going off the deep end, such that the governor himself, DeSantis, is actually kind of distancing himself from this new curriculum. And the curriculum that's suggested, and I'm not sure where they are with it process-wise. I was trying to look that up before the show, but is that they want to teach slavery as not completely evil, but also beneficial in that in that people who came over from Africa learn skills and now benefit from the prosperity of the country that they were brought in, and that part of the history should be taught as well. And as people have said, historians have said, this is not, this is, you can point that out, but it's like saying there's some positive aspect to the Holocaust. I mean, because Hitler built the Autobahn, that's some kind of, benefit, from the Holocaust. You wouldn't even talk that way, right? I mean, it's, but this is how they're talking. And DeSantis himself is like saying, well, I didn't do it. I mean, he literally said that I didn't do it, but it's just, so the culture war has reached a point, and you're seeing a video that's gone viral all over YouTube. Candace Owens, white people didn't invent slavery, but they ended it, which is a gross oversimplification of a point that was made. I mean, people ended slavery in Europe long before the United States did. What took us so long? Well, our whole economy was based on it. We can talk about that another time, but the monetary value of the slaves at the time of the Civil War exceeded that of the value of the budget. So yeah, there were economic reasons, but there was a moral failure. When we had Jefferson proposing anti-slavery language in the Declaration of Independence, and then it was like, well, deal with your own slaves first, free them, and then talk to us about it. I mean, it's the history, the way we want to teach the history. I don't even want to call it a whitewash. It's just a complete mystery. Now, I don't want to hand it over to you, but I remember years ago, a left-winger, Eugene Genovese, wrote a book called Roll, Jordan, Roll. He was not trying to sugarcoat slavery at all, but he pointed out that there were actual friendships between slaves and their masters as a matter of record. But that's the insidious nature of it. That you can teach those things, and you can teach. That's the problem, is that you had people who could potentially be friends, but slavery poisoned that relationship. It poisoned all connections between them. You cannot own a human being and have a healthy relationship with them. You can make that point and point out that human beings find ways to do this. You can call it the Stockholm syndrome. I think it's even a little more complicated than that. But when you're raised in a system, you don't know anything else. So it's just, that it is what it is. That's the reality you're in. Just like today, nobody can picture that anything is going to be different from capitalism, even though people live in kind of semi-alternative situations in Europe. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here, but we've got efforts to make over slavery, and it's sort of like the Republicans have to kind of make up their mind because they want to say, well, it was Democrats who owned slaves, it was Democrats who founded the Klan, but then they're the ones who are trying to maintain the statues, trying to maintain the Confederate flag flying over various capitals in the South, and now trying to gloss over this institution that they only acknowledge as evil to the extent that Democrats were the ones who were owning slaves. I mean, it is an illness. We have an illness in this country that this is even a matter of debate. There's all kinds of directions we can go with this, Dave. I'm going to let you take it over.
Yeah, I know you read my mind. That's what I was going to lead with, is that there are a few different directions here, because the fact that, this is in Florida, it's Governor DeSantis' state. He's made a point of being provocative when it comes to, for example, the AP program, that the curriculum for AP studies for that he just all across the spectrum of wokeness, anti-wokeness. So he's got this national campaign to be, like I said, be provocative here. He disrupting the colleges, disrupting the schools, the libraries, the books, the curricula across the state. This is like his lane. But as a pushback, because he's the number 2 candidate in the national GOP primary race, there's the possibility that Donald Trump might not become the candidate, and then therefore this guy would be sort of next in line currently with about 20% of the. We'll talk about this in the next segment.
Right.
So there's national political implications. There's Florida state implications. But I think what's at play most here is just this larger culture war. And I just want to read what actually we're even talking about for folks who don't know.
Sure.
So the state standard is this is a quote, the new standard that they proposed. I don't know how far, like you said, I don't know how approved it is yet, but it's examine the various duties and trades performed by slaves. That's it. And then it says, for example, agriculture work, painting, carpentry, tailoring, domestic service, blacksmithing, transportation. So it seems okay on the surface so far, right? But then there's a benchmark clarification. And the clarification is instruction includes how slaves developed skills which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. And it's that last clause. It just doesn't need to be there. So I know these things are complicated. We're talking about middle school aged kids and they're getting exposed to slavery. What are the nuances of slavery? Now, if you don't think critical race theory, if you think that's way too much, if you think that understanding the sort of institutional and structural legacy of slavery too much. But we're just talking about slavery itself here. Okay, so far so good. But when you take an institution like that, now it seems like there's a political element here, and I think that's why you have Kamala Harris coming out with the speech that she did, saying, "Look, this is gaslighting. You're telling us that slavery benefited slaves." And it didn't, and we need to draw a line somewhere. So we're calling you out. Slavery did not benefit slaves. So we need to push back. So in a way, like the way I've heard this framed, let me give it one last little bit of background. Dr. William Allen from the Florida Standards Working Group. He's a black, I think, professor. I forgot what school. I think I saw his affiliated university. But he said. We never said that slavery was beneficial to Africans, and that's nowhere in the policy. What we said is that it is, and this is a quote from him, an interview for CBS. It is the case that Africans proved resourceful, resilient, adaptive, and were able to develop skills and aptitudes which served to their benefit both while enslaved and after enslavement. He said history should include the stories of the people who experienced slavery, and that personal benefit applies to those skills, not the overall experience of enslavement. Now, okay, that's his opinion. That's what their opinion is, the Florida Standards Working Group. I would argue that this is not the place for this type of approach. It comes across as being a little bit like both sidesism, where you start from a position of American exceptionalism, and America is extraordinary, and we are the shining beacon on the hill, but slavery's there, right? So the way I as a something that has to be taught about, learned from in order for us to advance, and arguably we haven't done a whole lot of that advancement yet, not enough certainly in the last 50 years since we really started to try. So my point here is that even if the historical facts on the ground do shed light on nuances of history of slavery and the relative severity of slavery, whether you say, oh, well, really it was the Caribbean slave trade that was terrible, not necessarily quite as much in the US, or in Africa, they started, and even in the Middle East, that they started trading slaves before there even was an America. So it's not totally our fault. Like that, to me, even if nuances shed light, and that's debatable, the purpose of including this element in the curriculum serves to diminish the stain of slavery on our tradition of American exceptionalism. Right. And this is a problematic narrative. When you look at the average lifespan of an enslaved person was 7 to 35 years, it's really hard to reconcile personal benefit in that context.
This is a completely one-sided history too, because if we wanted to go in and talk about, well, there were two sides to the Bataan death march of World War II, veterans groups and right-wing groups would scream bloody murder if we talked about, maybe there was some benefit to the survivors of that, or they were in better shape or something. It would be stupid, and rightly so. That would be regarded as that. So so why are they doing this here? But partly there's this movement of revisionist history that began even before this. And Thomas Sowell, a conservative black historian, I used to have a lot more respect for. Unfortunately, he was against Trump when he first started, but I think he's for whatever reason he's fallen into line with the Trumpers in recent years. He used to stood up against the what was it, the one about the IQ test, the
bell curve.
The bell curve. He argued against that. He broke the party line for that. But now he not only does he participate in whitewashing the history, along with Candace Owens, white people ended slavery, but he is being dishonest in it. One of his, if you go to YouTube, you'll find one of his videos is about how the movie Roots, or the series Roots, lied to you about slave catching. And it says white people didn't go into the African countryside to capture slaves. They would have died of malaria, blah, blah, blah. They couldn't survive for more than a year. There are very few examples. Most of those slave catchers were black. Well, he didn't even bother to rewatch the movie. Obviously, he hadn't seen it since the 1970s. I encourage people to find that video and then go to YouTube and type in Roots slave catcher scene. all but one of the slave catchers is black in that scene. So it was a complete, misrepresentation as to what was represented in Roots. And this is an historian. This is, somebody of intellect that I used to respect. And unfortunately, that's what we're caught up in here was, well, everybody did slavery. Yes, yes, Africans did have slaves. Africans sold slaves to the Arab world, but it was nothing like the Atlantic slave trade, which was a huge industry, and it was financed primarily by European interests. Yes, black people were involved, just as Jews were involved in helping set up the death camps. I mean, things like this always happen. People want to survive. People have to survive in the context. But we have this history going out there, and then you get all kinds of people, young people on YouTube saying, "Oh, I guess it wasn't all that bad, and I guess it was just as bad over in Africa. And at least they came here and they got to learn how to read and do stuff." And it just is a complete misunderstanding of the tens of thousands of people who were uprooted from Africa, yes, by Africans physically, but delivered to white ships at the coast and brought across to the Americas to never see their families again and to be a part of a slavery that existed here longer than it existed in most other places in this country, in this Christian country, with using biblical quotes to justify itself. Of wives do what your husbands ask, and slaves do what your masters tell you to do. I mean, even in the New Testament, and it's just it has to be fought back. But how do we do this? Now they're trying to put it into the curriculum because they know they're getting success here with young people who don't have, and unfortunately, history itself is a declining major. It's like one of the biggest declining of the liberal arts majors. It's kind of scary as to what is going to be learned.
So there's a couple different angles here, and I know obviously we could do a whole hour on this stuff, but I took a graduate class once called The Age of European Global Expansion, and we focused on 3 areas, and it was West Africa, the Mississippian Valley, and Peru, the Incan Empire, and we spent 14 weeks going into minute detail of each of the policy decisions that went with that transculturation that resulted in the destruction of civilizations, and just obviously right now we're talking about slavery, so we're really talking about West Africa piece of this, and it's just there's so much to learn. The fact that they put this in the curriculum and the way that they put it in, I think that's why we're getting the pushback. So you've got from a political side, you've got like Representative Maxwell Frost, Democrat from Florida. He's a millennial. I've been in a couple meetings with him recently, hearing him speak on different issues. He spoke really eloquently about this one. He said that and again, this is political. You and I try to be above politics here to a certain extent, but he's basically saying that these people, meaning the right, want to not just erase history but change it. They are seeing that 70% of Gen Z are voting Democratic, and that in reality, there's this latent neo-fascist movement growing that needs to convince young people of changing their mindset for the generation. And he knows that things like this, they know that things like this are going to drive people to vote and organize. So it's a very provocative thing to have out there. But I think I know we're in our closing stretch here. I want to throw out there, which I thought was really a great insight. There's a journalist named Ryan Grimm. So he writes for The Intercept, and I've also seen him on Breaking Points, which is a podcast. But he spoke, I think it was this morning. I don't know. Maybe it was last night. My days are blurring together. But he spoke about this issue. And so I'm paraphrasing three quick bullet points. He said, when you focus on being in the anti-woke candidate, like DeSantis, and you work to undermine the existing curriculum that's in place, you have to realize your curriculum is going to face scrutiny. And he gave the example of Robert Smalls, who was an enslaved ship pilot in Charleston, South Carolina. He stole his slave ship. He delivered it to the Union Army. He fought on behalf of the Union Army. He became a Congress member, and he worked closely with Harriet Tubman. So he's a great American hero. Like, we should all know his name, and you just don't know it, right? So this is one of the highlights of our history of how this person transcended his status as a slave. What Ryan says is the takeaway here is this curriculum gets a little bit too close close to congratulating the person who taught him how to pilot the ship, when in fact he was owned as property and he and his family were utterly exploited.
Okay, well, we'll probably be taking this up more, but it's interesting that Governor DeSantis distanced himself from it, tried to anyways, and we're going to talk a little bit about him and some other Republicans in the next segment.
The goals are the same for all Americans.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
Governor Reagan, as a matter of fact, began his political career campaigning around this nation against Medicare.
There you go again.
And I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
If Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life.
Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
All right, we have the first presidential debate of a major party coming up in a few weeks, August 23rd. Republicans are scrambling to qualify. The Republicans have kind of some similar qualifications as Democrats do. You've got to poll well, and we can talk a little bit more about the details. You have to fundraise well, and you had to have made and fundraise not just in terms of money, but also in terms of numbers of unique donors. And then there's also, how many public appearances have you made? So there's a lot of people, but you have to make both the polling and the fundraising threshold. And then, of course, this year there's yet another requirement is you have to pledge to support anybody who's nominated, even if they're a felon. So it's we have that. My understanding is as of Monday, 7 candidates had qualified for the polling, and that is to basically reach 1% or higher in at least 2 qualifying national polls, and then also in 2 qualifying state polls, one from separate states. That's another one. The fundraising are a little bit more complicated, but I believe 7 have qualified under polling. What I have here is Trump, DeSantis, Ramaswamy, Pence, Haley, and Scott and Christie. Then fundraising, we have Trump, DeSantis, Scott, Haley, Christie, Ramaswamy, I'll have to learn how to say his name, and Burgum, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, considered kind of a moderate in that. And then you have the criteria of 40,000 unique donors. They want to know that you got support from a lot of different people. So, looks like we'll probably have about at least 7, but others do have a couple of weeks to qualify. I'm not sure what the cutoff date is, but so what is going to happen here? I want to talk a little bit about who's going to be in that debate, and if you don't make it in that debate, do you have any chance whatsoever? And who is going to be the person? Who are going to be the top candidates? And DeSantis, as we've discussed in the past, is sinking fast. He tried to reboot his campaign. He's laid off a bunch of his staff. I don't think he's doing anything to improve his situation. So the question is who replaces him as Trump's primary opposition opponent? And we'll talk a little bit about that. But Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, cool. Thank you for that setup. I got slightly different info than you did, but because mine's probably from a different source. But the 6 that are surely in currently is Trump, DeSantis, Haley, Scott, Christie, and Ramaswamy, with others having a little bit of a challenge with the supporters. So, for example, former Vice President Mike Pence, he's been getting 1% or more in national polls, but he's having a hard time getting that many number of supporters, or at least he was. And so there have been, what I think is really interesting about the others that might be eligible is the way that they're getting past that hurdle of the 40,000 supporters $200 each in 20 states. I think it's worth mentioning. So what Doug Burgum did, he's the governor of North Dakota and a former tech executive, so his entrepreneurial spirit kicked in. What he was able to do was he said the first 50,000 people that donate $1 to his campaign will get a $20 gift card.
Oh, jeez.
And so he's budgeted basically what equals $950,000 plus the cost of the cards to raise $50,000 so that he can get that for. Yeah, to qualify. And so some people have said that scheme may actually run foul of the FEC rules against straw donors, where you end up getting reimbursed for your political donation. So he might just be doing this just to say, hey, let me on the stage. But then it might be like, actually, buddy, this isn't legit down the road. He's trying to get in, he's doing what he can to get in the mix. Right. And there's a couple there. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to say, I think you're right. According to NBC, only 6 have actually qualified, and Pence isn't on that list.
Gotcha. Yeah. So the deal with Pence, I think, is that he's getting the 1% in New Hampshire and Iowa. He needs traction in national polls. Sorry, I said that in reverse. He's getting his 1% in national polls, but he's not getting the supporters.
I mean, and what's with him? Why does he even think he has a chance? I mean,
Well, we'll get to it a little bit. I guess one thing just to directly answer your question, he's very close to the Koch network of funds. So he's got unlimited backing, and he was the vice president, and he's really popular with evangelicals. So he at least thinks he has a chance, and he's got money. So that's why I think he's still in the mix. And truly, if Trump did go down, it would be a little bit like a vice president might be natural. But I want to mention this other technique, which is just to show you Miami Mayor Francis Suarez. He also is having a real hard time getting the supporters. So what he's decided to do is they're calling it, I think 538 calls it the sweepstakes approach. So for $1, any donor gets a chance at a pair of front row seats to watch Lionel Messi play for Inter Miami soccer team, which those seats have a value of $1,000 a piece for two tickets. That's $2,000.
That would seem to be the same FEC rule, though. They're getting more value than they're donating. I mean, I guess not.
It's a contest looking for 40,000 donors, and they're just looking to squeak in the next couple of weeks. Yeah. And his super PAC is called SOS America, and they offered sweepstakes for up to $15,000 in tuition reimbursement. But the problem with him, of course, is that his polling is also close to zero. So he's probably not going to qualify. But it's interesting just to say, like, what will people do to meet these metrics? And one last thing, Ramaswamy, his star is rising quite a bit. One of the things that he's doing, which is I don't know, I haven't heard anyone label this one yet, but maybe we'll call it the what's the business model of Amway? What's that called?
Oh, pyramid scheme.
Pyramid. Well, I'm not going to say that, but but anyway, he's offering donors 10%. There you go. Multi-level marketing. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah. Multi-level marketing is the politically correct way.
Term.
Yes, the polite term, exactly. So he's offering his donors 10% of anything donated by people who they share the donation link with. So once you make a donation, he's going to give you a link, and you steer everybody to that link. And he basically what he's doing is he's turning all of his donors into fundraisers, and he's combining. Politico has said that the traditional fundraising roles of bundlers and professional fundraisers. So he's turning people into bundler / fundraisers, and people are getting hyped up because it's like a participation scheme, and you get money yourself. You get a commission. So I'm not saying that's the only reason he's popular. He's also wrote the book Woke Inc., and he's out there. He's very articulate. He's arguably very optimistic. He's trying to do the Reagan pitch of how it's make America great again, with a distinct and he's forthright. He's a straight shooter, we'll say. So other than that, I think former Governor Asa Hutchinson, he's doesn't look too
he doesn't look good, and the irony there is, I think of all of them, if they won the nomination, he would have the best chance of defeating Biden. but I think he has the least chance of getting nominated.
Yeah.
It's just one of the biggest ironies. I did want to qualify. Pence can probably, even though he's having a hard time in state polls, can probably qualify because if you get at least 1% in 3 qualifying national polls conducted after July 1, he'll probably qualify there, even if he's not doing too well in any particular state.
Do you want to pivot to that real quick about qualifying polls? We can make a short point of it, but basically the Republican Party is saying that if they if a poll has over 800 respondents, and a lot of the small national polls don't meet that threshold, so there's been very few. As of 2 days ago, I think there was only like 5 qualifying polls so far, and so you have to have more than 100. Sorry, you'd have to have more than 1% in 3 or 2 if you get the state qualifiers. So,
and I just want to point out. That the RNC is math challenged there because actually for the United States purposes, a sufficiently random poll of between 300 and 400 is enough. 800, adding another 400 really doesn't add that much to the accuracy, and maybe cuts it a fraction of a point or something to be a little bit more accurate. But it really is statistically insignificant. It's not. It's a little counterintuitive, but the fact of the matter is, 800 people is not twice as good as 400 people, not even 1.1 times as good, really. It's but that's the
much
RNC.
bigger.
Yeah, that's
right.
The
You'd have to get like 1,500 or 3,000 people to have it be significant, and none of these, even the gold standards like YouGov, are still only talking to about 1,500 people.
Right, and the bigger you get, the harder it is to be sufficiently randomized. So it's a trade-off either way. You take a chance on being inaccurate and other things. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out, that RNC, their criteria there is pretty arbitrary, probably because somebody there doesn't understand math. But go ahead.
So I think it's a good time. We could jump over, if you want to, like who all is in the mix. And if you look, so Ramaswamy and Nikki Haley have been making the most trips to Iowa and New Hampshire. So part of the state polling that's part of the Republican Party's standard here is in the early states, right? So we're talking about Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada. And they might have a couple other states on that list, but Iowa and New Hampshire are the big ones here. And so we see that even Asa Hutchinson also, he's pretty actively going to Iowa. Those three, they spent a bunch of their time in Iowa. The others, Trump, DeSantis, Scott, Pence, they're less than half as many trips, and about evenly balanced between Iowa and New Hampshire. But so you can look at the polling numbers for those states to get a sense of how effective they are. Because on the national stage, the polling doesn't really matter because you win state by state, right? So when you look at the Real Clear Politics averages for Iowa, you see DeSantis is dropping down to, in the most recent polls, 16%. So he's on the decline. At one point, he was like 40. Most recently, he was like 20. Even when he did his reboot 2 days ago, his campaign manager said, and we're the only candidates getting above 20%. But in fact, he's getting like 15, 16%. So who's benefiting? Right now, Tim Scott is getting, depending on the poll, he's up to, I'll give you the averages. The averages are Trump at 50, DeSantis at 17, Scott at 8, Ramaswamy at 4, Haley at 4, Pence at 4, Christie at 4, and I'm rounding rather. Burgum at 2. No one else has 1. So you see some of DeSantis's support is going to Ramaswamy, Scott, and to a lesser extent Haley, Pence. And if you switch real quick over to New Hampshire, it's Trump 41, DeSantis 19. He's also gotten some 15s in the mix. But now Christie is 6, Scott 6, Haley 5, Burgum 4, Ramaswamy 4, Pence just over 1. No one else won. So you see Christie is really heavily focused on New Hampshire. That's his bread and butter. That's where he kicked off his campaign. Last week. Go ahead.
Here's a question for you. Trump has suggested he might skip the event. I think probably because he wants to avoid Chris Christie, who basically took out Marco Rubio's campaign in 2016 by having to face up to him in the debate. Is Trump afraid of Chris Christie, or is there some other strategy here?
Well, I would say that publicly what he's saying is that he's refusing to pledge to support the winner of the Republican primary race. So he's like, basically Trump's position is, if someone else wins, I'm not supporting them. So no, I'm not going to do that pledge. So he's trying to say, Republican Party, you're not bigger than me, I'm bigger than you. You can't make me pledge anything. And I think that's the official position. A couple other people have had reservations about that requirement. Technically, you're not supposed to be able to participate in the first debate if you don't sign the pledge. So it's a game of chicken right now.
And it's kind of odd because he was pushing for a pledge that he would be pardoned, let alone supported, I mean, if they won. But anyway, well, that's interesting. Yeah, he might skip it for that reason. So
but I just want to say, not to interrupt you, but I want to say I agree with you 100% that Chris Christie is basing his whole campaign on being the hatchet job for Trump here. And even if Christie can't get past his 5 or 6% popularity, he might be doing the Republican Party a favor by shredding Trump publicly, and I don't think Trump wants that. So I think you hit the nail on the head. And then the question would be, who else is going to be surviving in the wings? Is it Tim Scott or Nikki Haley or anybody else for that matter? With Ramaswamy, I think Ramaswamy is kind of just a novelty currently.
He's out there. He already said that people under 25 shouldn't vote. I mean, things like that are stuff that's going to get him in trouble. That'll be used against him if he ever makes any move. That'll be used against him. It may not be that many voters, but it is a few, and that will cost him some votes. That and a few other things.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie. The spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
Okay, predictions. What do you got, Dave?
Well, I wish it wasn't the case, but today's Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell experienced a moment where he froze mid-sentence during a press conference. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but this was a moment of concern for his well-being from everyone in the room, and it'll be shared by anyone who watches the footage. In fact, Senator Joni Ernst was inspired to pray on his behalf. She spontaneously performed the Christian crossing ritual, like right on camera, right when it was happening.
Wow.
Senator McConnell later said he's fine, to the relief of many, and his aides say he temporarily experienced lightheadedness, but there's no denying that the image of that moment will leave a lasting impression on Americans. He's the longest serving Senate party leader in American history. He was elected to lead the conference 9 times. This is so important. Time magazine named him one of the most 100 influential people in the world. He has held his Kentucky seat since '85 and does not face re-election until 2026, but he's 81, and his tenure as party leader beyond this 2-year term is now surely in question. My prediction is that he will not be chosen to lead the Republican Senate in 2024. Instead, leaving Minority Whip John Thune of South Dakota to step in as the next party leader and potentially as conference chair if the Republicans take control of the Senate in the 119th Congress.
Well, that's a big one. Mine's kind of wimpy compared to that, but I'm going to go back to our third topic. Yeah, why do these people stay in office so long? I mean, it's a lot of pressure, Feinstein included. But anyway, I'll be real quick here. Senator Tim Scott has had political action committees dump a whole bunch of money into several states. I do believe that he is going to bypass Rick DeSantis probably within the next few weeks, probably in the debate, and will be Trump's number one opponent. I don't think it's going to make a difference in the long run. If Trump wants that nomination, he's got it. But I do believe that Scott will be the primary opposition, and he's just playing for a future run for president.
I think you got it. I think that's a good one.
All right. Well, until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.